you ever watch your kids spiral and think, where did that come from? One moment they're calm, the next it's just full blown meltdown. Like someone hit a switch. What if I told you it is a switch, not a mental health breakdown, but a nervous system overload? And today's guest has been flipping that switch and helping families breathe again. Hey friends, welcome back to Beyond Adjustments. We dig beneath the symptoms and find what's really going on in the body, the mind, and sometimes the parenting. I'm your host, Amin Said, and in today's episode, let's just say it's personal, because if you've ever had a child deal with anxiety, or maybe you've been the one lying awake wondering how to help, this conversation's for you. Joining me is Dr. Josh Collingsworth from True Source Chiropractic. He's not just adjusting spines, he's helping families reconnect, regulate, and finally understand that behavior is communication, especially in kids. Dr. Josh, welcome to the show. Brother, look, this is the third time you're back on the show. I don't even know how to welcome you back. It's like, it's your show and I'm on it. Like, I'm so glad you're back. You know, are you ready, man? Are you ready to unpack some nervous system truth bombs today?
I am. Thank you so much, Amin, for having me. Yeah, this is something that's, near and dear to my heart. And so I love talking about this. I love talking to parents, and I love, being kind of the voice, in addition to my mentors, being the voice of pediatric chiropractic and neurologically focused chiropractic. So yeah, let's get into it. I'm on board. I'm ready,
man.
Got my coffee. We're good.
Man. Yeah, let's do it. I got two just for the record, but yes, let's go. All right, so let's set the scene. Mom walks in, right, frazzled, dragging her 7-year-old who hasn't slept in 3 nights.
Yeah.
Can't sit still, won't eat their carrots unless they're like cut diagonally, right? Does that sound familiar?
Oh yeah, all too
all
familiar.
Right, so what are you seeing in your practice?
Yeah. Man, you hit the nail on the head. We literally, we have kids coming in and, mom and dad, they're exhausted, right? They're cutting eyes at each other because they're so tired that, they just want to, end each other. And, and really what it boils down to is that their kiddos are struggling, and we're seeing just an all-time surge in kids struggling with, diverse issues, whether it's autism, spectrum disorders, sensory processing. More commonly now than ever is anxiety and depression, right? And we're seeing these kids struggle day in and day out. And the odd thing is like, we're one of the most developed countries in the world, and we're still having these kiddos struggle more than ever. And the rate and the incidence of these cases keeps skyrocketing. And parents are flocking in droves to holistic practitioners who, really have an alternative way of dealing with this. And it's my honor, my pleasure to work with these kiddos.
Yeah. Well, why do you feel like, why are so many traditional approaches to like this anxiety issue or whatever the case may be?
Yeah.
Well, why is it not cutting it?
Yeah. I mean, if you think about anxiety and what's the remedy here in America, right? It's, it's anti-anxiety meds. It's, if you have attention deficit or behavioral issues, it's ADHD meds. It's really just go into a bottle and look for solutions. And that's just realistically just not the answer. Kids need real answers. They need real neurological solutions. And so it's not, and I always said, even before I started working with kids, health is not found in a bottle, you know what I mean? And so that being said, we're grateful for supplements. We're grateful for medicine for sure. They do have a place, but at the same time, when we're dealing with a 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old with anxiety or, just sensory overwhelm, that's just not going to be found. We need in a bottle. We're going to need to really find real answers and really understand the cause as to why these things are happening so that we can find the solution, that helps address that and not just, kind of mask over it. So I talk about, and we can get into it, but I talk
Yeah.
about ADHD medications and what they do. And, they stimulate a part of the brain that, really releases dopamine, and that dopamine is a reward center of the brain. And so as you keep taking it, you need more and more and more.
Yeah.
That's why kids will start at 5 milligrams, jump to 10, 15, 20, and then now we're at extended release. Right. And so, it just keeps building. You're never
Yeah.
really finding a solution. You're just adding more to it,
It's a mess.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a mess, unfortunately.
Yeah.
You use the phrase, or you have, I believe, anxiety is stored
Mhm.
in the nervous system, and I love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But can you help parents and anybody who's interested in really understand what that actually means in real life?
For sure. Yeah. So before I kind of dive into that, my grandmother used to say, my country grandmother, raised in North Carolina, she used to say, Josh, if you look too far forward, you're anxious. And if you look too far back, you're depressed. And you're only happy when you're looking at the here and now and present. And I was like, what is she talking about?
Yeah, yeah.
and, and
Wise
now-
woman. Yeah,
she was full of wisdom though, because now when we actually think about anxiety, what is it, right? We are simply, all of the possible combinations of things to happen, whatever we're anxious about. It could be, what's going to happen, at summer camp, in a few hours, as we wake up. It could be, about, for us adults, about bills or taxes or whatever, so we're just thinking about all the possible combinations. And really what anxiety is it's an overstimulation. And I don't mean to oversimplify it, but for our listeners and our viewers, really anxiety is an overstimulation and an override of the brain to process thoughts and emotions in a clear, concise way. And
mm,
so when we're talking about anxiety, it really does stem from the nervous system and from how the brain is processing. And so, when I look at anxiety, a lot of times we have physiologic responses to anxiety, right? Our brain gets overwhelmed. It runs, it's almost like a hamster wheel. It's going a million miles a minute and we can't slow it down. And as a result, right, we get this sympathetic response. We get heart rate that goes up, blood pressure goes up, right? We're not sleeping, we're not eating. We can't really focus on one task, right? That explains a lot of what our children are going through, right? They're not sleeping, they're not eating, they're not pooping. They're struggling on a very basic fundamental level because of how excitatory their brain is. And so now what we're seeing through science and through research and meta-analysis is that vagal tone, the vagus nerve, is really linked. And if we have a low vagal tone, we oftentimes see magnification of anxiety and depression, and these type of mental health disorders. And so
sure.
a lot of times, it's like, well, maybe it's not a pill that we need. Maybe it's regulation of the nervous system and how it's
Yeah,
processing information coming in.
yeah. So let's be real though for a second. No
Yeah.
parent is walking around saying my child has poor vagal tone.
You're right.
They're,
Right.
they're saying my kid screams when
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
socks are too tight, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
What are some unexpected ways anxiety shows up in kids that
Yeah.
parents might totally miss or maybe even misinterpret?
Yeah. So what's interesting is you're absolutely right. I mean, like no parent goes around saying, "Hey, yeah, my child's really got a low vagal nerve tone," right? They're
Yeah.
like, the vagus nerve, what in the world is that? But what are we're-
What happened in the vagal tone stays in the vagal tone.
exactly. They're like, Las Vegas, what? No, but what we're seeing when we think about some of the conditions that our kids are experiencing, they're not starting at 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. They've been going on for a while. Okay.
Yeah.
And so really, I'm a big fan of going backwards to go forwards. So when we
Mm,
have a kiddo that comes in and, one of the things listed is, hey, they're having poor focus. They're a little bit more anxious. They, struggle with depression, whatever it is. We go way back in their healthcare journey and in their, really chronological story to understand where this kind of started. And then we kind of spin it up into present day. And what I mean by that is, in our intake, we actually go into, hey, tell me a little bit about what pregnancy was like when you were pregnant with your son or daughter. Tell me a little bit about, that birth process. A lot of times mom will be like, oh, pregnancy was very stressful. I was very anxious myself, because we were struggling to get pregnant, or, my husband left, or, you name the story, but there was some type of event that mom had a little bit of anxiety. And we know, and science knows, and research knows, and most people know that if mom is experiencing whatever stress, anger, sadness, that is easily transferred through that umbilical cord, which is more than just blood, oxygen, nutrients. It's also emotional connection. It's neurons. It's neurology that's going there as well, and feelings. And so now, okay, we have kind of the stage, if you will, that has been set. And then a lot of times in this country, we have a lot of birth interventions, right? So these interventions are now starting to be shown to really dysregulate a brand new healthy nervous system. And so we're seeing these kids, get pulled and yanked and all these things from the womb. And we've disrupted, again, that vagal tone, which sits right on that brain stem, right? So we've ripped, tucked, pulled, twisted, cleared shoulders, whatever we have to do. And now we're starting to see, okay, well, after birth, tell me a little bit about, the first couple of weeks to months of life. Oh man, they weren't sleeping at all, or they were, they could hold their head up when they were like 2 weeks old. And in my head, it's like, that's not a good thing. That,
Yeah.
I have to burst the bubble a little bit.
Yeah.
And parents are like, man, my child's going to be the next, Usain Bolt. I'm like,
Right.
maybe, but that's not a good thing that they're so developed and that their
Yeah.
muscle tone is so tight that they're able to hold their head up. And so now we start getting into, okay, well, tell me about infancy. Tell me about toddlerhood. Tell me about, when they started going into grade school. And you start just kind of seeing the dominoes stack against them. You really start seeing, oh man, this child has struggled long before they started coming in here.
Mhm.
Because quite honestly, what we talk about is anxiety in an 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 year old is no different than colic in a 2 week, 3 week, 4 week old. It just manifests differently. The neurology is still the same. You still
Mhm.
have dysautonomia. You still
Mhm.
have neuromotor or neuromuscular tension. You still have subluxation, right? So the neurology doesn't change. It just
Yeah.
changes the phases of their life. So what I tell people is anxiety in a 10, 11, 12 year old is no different than that kiddo who, just got home from the hospital today, is not sleeping, not eating, not pooping, still not doing any of the things that they need to be doing. It just changed form, right? And by the
Mhm.
way, the kid with anxiety, right, is probably still not eating, sleeping, and or pooping, right?
Right.
So, it's
Right.
now we've just added more to this recipe. And I tell people, and a lot of parents will come in and they'll just be like, oh my gosh, I wish I would have known this sooner. And I'm like, you didn't, and you made the best decisions that you had at the time based on the information that you had, but now you do. And now you're making an even better decision, right? By
Right.
looking at your neurology.
Yeah. Take me through the moment you're showing a parent the scan
Mhm.
or the results.
Yeah.
Explain to me how it all, like explaining how it all connects. Like what's that moment like? Are they in shock, in relief, in tears, all three?
Sure, sure. I've really had the whole gambit of emotions when I'm talking to parents. In talking to parents, I keep my doctor hat on, but I also kind of put on my parent hat and understand
Mm,
kind of where they're sitting, because I
mm,
too was in their seat at one point in time with my youngest. And so we do 3 scans in our office. And if you're not familiar with the Insight scans, Dr. David Fletcher with Insight CLA. Great man, great human being. I would love to have him on a podcast at some point in time and just talk to him. But we do 3 scans that really kind of assess the totality of the nervous system. And the first one being what we call an EMG, a surface EMG or surface electromyography. And what we're doing there is actually looking at neuromotor or neuromuscular tone. The old chiropractor would just be like, oh, yeah, they're really tight or really tense. And it's like compared to what, right? We don't really have a metric to look at that. And now we do, right? So when we're looking at an EMG, we can actually see, amplitude in terms of how much neuromotor tension that they are actually expressing. The kiddo or an adult or whoever we're scanning, we can actually see how much tension they're holding, right? And we measure that in millivolts, and we look at pattern, we look at symmetry, things of that nature. And then the second one that we look at is what we call the thermal. This one is kind of a what I call a geolocator. It locates the stress on the actual nervous system, that neurospinal system. And so when we're talking about subluxation, this one kind of helps us like say, hey, here are the problem areas. This is where the stress really is. And then when we look at the HRV, this is now a 30,000-foot view of the nervous system. So HRVs are becoming more the norm and less the exception in terms of evaluating nervous system health. I mean, they're in Garmin's, they're in Whoops, they're in Auras, they're Aura rings, they're everywhere. But HRV is now the kind of gold standard of measuring neurologic health in terms of the nervous system and how it's functioning. Now, when I'm looking at these scans, the EMG really, so the electromyography, that one kind of is the one that I sit on a little bit longer because it's hard for people to grasp that, hey, my kiddo has tension, right? Like my kiddo has muscle, like just increased muscle tone or muscular activity. And it's not in like a good way. I have a lot of bodybuilders and stuff that come in here, or like people who are really into fitness. I'm like, wait a minute, I've got good tone. That's great. I'm like, very different than just having like definition, right? That's body fat percentage. What we're talking about is how is the nervous system responding? And we know that muscles are responsible for three different things, right? They're obviously responsible. The obvious one is for movement. Okay. So they help us move, right? The second one is they help us to hold posture, right? But then the last one is it actually sends messaging into our brain. So when we have a kiddo who is like really, really like high tone, we see red bars, we see green bars, blue bars of high neuromotor tone. And we see that their total energy on this graph is beyond, what it should be in millivolts. This tells me, hey, there's way too much electrical activity going into that brain. It's essentially like taking Metallica, the band Metallica, and cranking it up as loud as you can in their ears. That's essentially when we see a kiddo who's got that much motor tone or that much tension, if you will, that is saying, hey, their brain is becoming just blasted and inundated with too much information. And so, yeah, it makes sense that they can't process their information because there's too much going on. It's kind of like sitting you in front of a speaker at the your local amphitheater or concert venue and just saying, hey, whatever your favorite music is, we're just going to crank it up. We're going to sit you in front of it, and you're going to have to still process your world. You're going to have to pay your bills. You're going to have to go to work. You're going to have to do all these things.
Yeah,
Really hard for a kid to do that,
for
right?
sure. Yeah.
And so when I start to see parents in that conversation, when I start explaining it that way, a lot of parents are like, they'll start crying or they'll be like, oh my goodness, right? Because that really drives the point home. It's not that your kid is inherently a bad child. It's not that your kid is inherently an emotional wreck. That's really not the case. Their neurology is not allowing them to express themselves. It's not allowing them to process their environment. Because really, at the end of the day, what is the nervous system all about? It's about perceiving our environment and providing coordinated responses. So
Yeah.
then we shift gears and we go into, okay, so that's happening, right? We've got a lot of motor tone or neurologic tone. Now let's go into their HRV. Let's talk about their heart rate variability. Well, that is where we talk about the difference between sympathetic dominance, which is that fight or flight response, versus parasympathetic dominance, which is that rest digest response. And in the perfect world, we have a perfect synchrony between both of them. We're not
Mm.
listed off into, fight or flight, which is kind of our stress response system, but we're not listed off into that parasympathetic system, which is rest digest. We want a perfect harmonious balance. A lot of times we find kids who have anxiety, we have depression, we have, you name it, right? Fill in the blank. A lot of times those kiddos are in sympathetic overwhelm, and they have been
Mm.
since day one, right?
Mm. Mm.
And so now we start talking a little bit about, okay, well, what would their life look like if we moved them out of sympathetic response? And a lot of times, I mean, I could talk for hours about this stuff, but a lot of times what I tell parents, because what is the number one fear in all of America? public speaking. I was like, if I were to tell you that you're about to go outside and give a speech in front of 5,000 people, what would happen? Most parents, there are a few that are like, oh, I would love that. But then they're the exception. But most parents are like, oh my God, I would probably panic, right? Yeah, you'd start having a physiologic response. Heart rate would go up, right? Respirations would go up. If you were hungry, you're no longer hungry. If you were thirsty, you're probably not thinking about drinking. If you were tired, you're now revved up, right? You're in survival mode. You're in stress mode. Now translate that into your child, okay? That same kind of stress response that you felt, that's what they're feeling day in and day out. And that's why they're expressing themselves the way that they are, is because their nervous system doesn't know whether they're running from a tiger or just going to school, right? And so, because to them, it's all the same.
Yeah.
To their nervous system, it's all the same. And so when parents start realizing how intense that feeling, how intense that processing, how intense their physiology is responding to the stress, then parents have that aha moment.
Yeah.
And then once I explain those two things, the EMG and the HRV, then we go into the subluxation component and we say, okay, we've talked about the what. Now let's talk about the why. Okay. And so now we go into the thermal, which tells us a little bit more about subluxation. It tells us a little bit more about, hey, they have stress on their spine. And by the way, it's not just stress on the spine, right? It's the neurospinal system. We're using the spine as a way to kind of explain this, but really what's in it, right? The spinal cord. We have the brainstem there, right? And right at the top of C1, right below occiput. And so now when we explain, okay, well, looking at their birth story, this is what happened. Actual movement that we tugged, we ripped, we pulled, we used a vacuum extraction, we used whatever. Now we put a lot of stress on that area. And so now they have dysregulation of the vagal tone, right? And this is causing these responses that they're experiencing. So we've got to restore that, right? And so now parents are like, oh my God, like you do all this? And I'm like, yes, every day. And it is truly, truly, truly amazing. And also, just kind of humbling when I get to express to a parent what I had to kind of find out on my own, but it is awesome to help them appreciate, hey, just how important the work that we do is, but also there is hope for your son or daughter.
Yeah.
So
I love that.
Yeah. So
That's
that was an elongated response to.
No, man, I love it.
No.
I really do. I really do. What do you say to people that will just call chiropractic like a pseudoscience?
Yeah. They're unfortunately uninformed in an age
Right.
where there's so much information. There's
Right.
also a lot of misinformation. And I think a lot of people just, they oversimplify chiropractic to just a crack, to just an adjustment, or to whatever they've seen on TikTok or Instagram or Facebook. And I tell people, I'm like, well, you might think that you understand what we do, but quite honestly, it took me 7 years into my profession to understand what we did. And that being said, and I'm always still learning. So I think there's an oversimplification. And I think that, we only think about it in terms of just back pain or neck pain or headaches.
Yep.
I don't think we think about it in terms of like, hey, neurologic reconstruction or, basically regulation of a nervous system.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
so that's why it's like, you know what, like there's never a shortage of people that I can educate, so.
Yeah. I get the comments all the time on my posts about chiropractic and how it's a farce. And I'm like, guys, I see it. Like the proof is in the pudding. Like it's there.
Yeah.
Anyway. Yeah.
Well, and I mean,
all right.
and just because it takes a little bit longer,
Yeah.
not an instantaneous thing.
It's not Amazon Prime. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We don't get it next day or even same day, right? We
Right.
have to understand that neurology really needs two things, time and repetition. And so if we give it time and we give it the adequate adjustments or tonal adjusting, we'll start seeing changes.
Yeah, for sure. 100%. All right. Let me ask you a challenge question. What is one belief about anxiety in kids that you wish every parent could unlearn?
while there is a genetic link, it's not the end all be all, right?
Mhm.
Just because there's a genetic predisposition, or, mom had anxiety or dad had anxiety or grandpa had anxiety, it does not necessarily mean that their child or grandchild or what have you are going to have it. Now they could, but also understand that if grandma and grandpa or mom and dad had it, they're probably just as dysregulated and probably have the same set of, issues that we just mentioned, but they just haven't been addressed, right? So I don't love when people are like, "Oh, it's just genetics." And it's like genetics play a major role in a lot of different things. I'm not going to, there's a reason why both my boys look the same, for the most part. But at the same time, genetics really kind of lay the foundation of, just because a gene is there, or just because, the potential for a gene to be expressed is there, does not mean it'll necessarily express itself, right? We have to have triggers. We have to have subluxation. We have to have, various things for those genes to be expressed.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of where I go with that. Is it's not always just a genetic. It's as simple as saying, "Oh, well, it's just my genetics." It's like, I feel like that's a cop out a little bit, because there's a
Yeah.
reason why those are being expressed.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Awesome.
Um, just had a thought in
Sure.
my head. Not necessarily related to my challenge question, but I was kind of going back to um, when you were talking about uh, explaining to the parents that their kids are acting out because of this or because of that.
Mhm.
Here's a real question for you,
Mhm.
because some of that, um, and I think you would agree, some of that could also be related to parenting style.
For sure.
I'm just
For
just
sure.
being real, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so so
Nature
so
versus
how?
nurture.
Actually, sorry, can you pull your mic forward towards you because I'm getting a lot of feedback.
Sure.
Yeah, that's good right there.
Better.
Yep, feedback's up just a little. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, yeah, there's still feedback. That's okay. We'll deal with it. No big deal. So yeah. So how do you deal with that situation? Because, or how do you know when it is one over the other? Like, it's
Yeah.
kind of hard to navigate now.
Yes. I mean, I go back and forth, right? Um, and truth be told, I'm not a parenting expert. I'm just not. What I
None of us
am, yeah, no, we're all figuring it out, right?
Right.
But
Right.
at the same time, I am a neurologic based chiropractor, and that is my area of expertise. And so when I, maybe am looking at a kiddo and saying, "Hey, there's obvious neurological deficits here."
Sure.
Well, I use the scans to kind of show me that, because we use subjective and objective, right? Not just subjective measures. We don't just have parents come in and be like, "Oh, my child misbehaved today," or X, Y, and Z. We also use the scans to kind of show us, hey, that actually kind of tracks. That makes sense. So for me, I rely heavily on scans, but I also
Mhm.
rely on learning that family, right? Learning the dynamics there, learning, okay, well, this little girl or this little boy, they just had a younger sibling be born, So yeah, they might be feeling a little, angst, or might be feeling a little, left out in the cold, so to speak. But my job is not to dictate parents and what they do day in and day out. There's subtle things I might say, hey, try this instead, or reward systems or whatever. But at the same time, like, that's not my role. My role is to get their kiddos as neurologically balanced and
Mhm.
regulated as possible. So I don't dive into that world too often, unless there's like some obvious things that I'm seeing in the office, or hearing about outside the office. But I really, really, really rely heavily on those scans and what they tell me. Now, if, for instance, we had a little girl. Unfortunately, there was a very bad incident a few weeks ago in Norfolk, Virginia, where, little girl was at a church, at like a summer camp at church. And unfortunately, there was like a shooting in the parking lot, and, no one was hurt, thankfully, but scary, right? Especially
Sure.
when bullets are, going through the church and whatnot and landing right above kids' heads. And
Okay.
so we had one of our patients who was there, and it was just one of those situations where it's like, hey, I'm sure that affected her in some way, shape, or form. Let's check her HRV. Let's see where she's at and see how her nervous system's responding to that. And fortunately, we'd been working with her for a little while, so her nervous system actually was doing pretty well. But in talking to her and things of that nature, I was just like, just trying to get a gauge of where she's at. And I just told mom, I was like, there might be a necessity to like maybe do a few sessions of counseling just so she can like talk therapy, talk it out a little bit. But from a
Right.
neurological perspective,
That's
she's
good.
actually doing well. So
Yeah.
it's just looking at the whole patient. It's
I
not,
see. I
yeah,
see how you do that. That's good.
yeah, yeah,
That's good. I like how you use what you know to talk about what you don't necessarily call yourself an expert in. So like what you are an expert in helps guide the conversation outside of those walls. So I
1000%.
love that.
Yeah,
Love that. That's
1000%.
awesome. So you're helping parents see, their kids differently. And, and honestly, Dr. Josh, that's a gift, really.
Yeah,
But let's talk about what happens after that
yeah,
aha moment with the
yeah,
parents, right? When the care begins.
yep.
So let's talk about the adjustment itself, right?
Mhm,
When they
mhm,
talk or,
mhm.
you know, whisper to the nervous system like a chiropractor does, right? But what's happening neurologically during
Sure.
or right after an adjustment that helps a child calm
Yeah,
down?
for sure. So, that first, we call it an ROF or report of findings. We're going over scans, right? We're telling the parents, this is the what, this is the why. And now, okay, here's how we address this, right? And so I'll take them out to the adjusting room, or the adjusting bay that we have. And, we'll put them on a table and I'll walk them through that first adjustment.
Mm,
And, what we're doing is I use a technique called Talsky, Talsky. It's a neurotonal adjusting technique. I have a myriad of different techniques that I use depending on what's presented in front of me. But at the same time, I'm explaining what's going on. And so as we're adjusting and we're looking at the sacrum and we're looking at the occiput and we're looking, kind of that sacro-occipital technique, and we're looking at neurologic tension, and I'm working on them. I'm observing the patient, I'm observing the kiddo, and I'm looking for kind of this deep respiration, right? So as I'm kind of sitting at the base of their skull or at C1, C2, or even at the sacrum, I'm observing their body mechanics. And a lot of times you can see a kid go from kind of like pent up, stressed, muscle energy turned on to kind of like, whew, that actually feels kind of good. A lot of a lot of kids, if they're able to, if they're speaking age or, older, they'll be like, man, like I feel relaxed, or,
mhm.
and that's really kind of what we're after here is not, it's not a massage. I want to clarify that. I have some parents coming in and be like, oh, you ready for your massage? And I'm like, this is not a massage,
Mhm.
right? Yeah. What we're doing here is we're stimulating vagal tone so that it can actually calm systemically all of those muscles, all of those areas of tension that are
Right,
overwhelming their brain. And so
right.
what we oftentimes see are what we call neurological soft signs initially, right? And so I will tell parents after an adjustment, hey, you may notice your kiddo is going to want to go to sleep or maybe falls asleep in the car on the way home. You may notice that they're, if they're an infant or something like that, blowing up a diaper before you even get there, right? Before you even get home. If they've been struggling with constipation, you may notice a kiddo who has just got a ravenous appetite all of a sudden, right? These are neurosoft signs because, again, as we're shifting neurology into more of a balanced or kind of away from sympathetic or stress turned on state, as we start kind of shifting them, we see natural physiological responses, which indicate, hey, their nervous system is starting to regulate, right? And again, what happens if you're running from a tiger? I mean, what happens, right? You're not pooping, right? You're not eating, you're not sleeping, you're not thinking about any
Tensing
of that.
up.
Yeah, everything's tense, right? So as we shift away from that, right, we get free of the tiger and we're starting to relax now, right? Now we can actually go back into, okay, I'm hungry again. Okay, need to go to the bathroom now. Okay, I'm sleeping again, right? So we
Mhm.
see these physiologic responses start coming back. So I always tell them, we may see it in the first adjustment. Oftentimes we do, but we may see it in the fifth or 15th adjustment. But
Mhm.
either way, we're going to evaluate their nervous system every 12 visits so that we can actually track what's happening with them.
Mhm. Mhm. Um, Going back to the vagal tone,
Mhm.
it sounds like something you ordered with a green smoothie. But but this is I mean, honestly, this is the game changer, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
tell me a little more about that.
Yeah. So if you're not familiar with it, the vagal tone, it has to do with the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is, they call it the great wandering nerve. I mean, when we think about the cranial nerve system, right? There's there's pairs of cranial nerves. There's 12 pairs of cranial nerves. And a lot of them have to do with what's happening in the face, right? We've got an optic nerve, we've got an olfactory nerve, meaning for smell, we've got an optic nerve for sight, we've got a facial nerve, we've got a trigeminal nerve, we've got, the facial nerve innervates things of the face, right? Trigeminal nerve, same thing. And so when we're thinking about these nerves that sit on the brainstem, a lot of them have to do with just what's happening up here. Okay. But the vagus nerve is the one nerve that actually goes beyond just location, okay, of the body. It helps regulate heart function, gut
Mm.
function, lung function. But
Wow.
what we now know is it actually helps regulate the prefrontal cortex, right? It acts as kind of a brake pedal or a regulator for the prefrontal cortex. And by the way, the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that really is responsible for decision making, impulsivity, all of these things, right? So a lot of kids, their prefrontal cortexes are running wild, right? They're literally just they think a thought and they do a thought, right? There's no like inhibition at all. It's just like think it, do it. And that's where impulsivity and behaviors and things of that nature come from, is because
Mm.
there's no real thought process. A lot of parents are going to be like, yeah, they're very impulsive, right? Or, maybe conversely, kind of to what we've been talking about is, man, they get so revved up, right? On this like idea of we're going to go to the water park, or we're going to be in a social setting, or we're going to go to a new school or a new camp or whatever. They get so worked up, and it's because there's no regulatory process that's happening there. It's just like
Mhm.
the prefrontal cortex is going crazy. So the
Yeah.
vagus nerve is the one nerve that kind of controls above and below its geographic origin or location. And one of the things that we do, there's a lot of ways to stimulate the vagus nerve. You can hum, you can use vagal nerve stimulators, you can do work in the inner ear, you can do, kind of tonal adjusting like we do. There are a lot of ways to do it, but one of the things that I kind of tell parents is that rather than just arbitrarily stimulating the vagus nerve, it's nice to know kind of how and what we're doing, as opposed to just, oh, go home and hum for a few minutes at a time,
Right,
There's just,
right, right.
we actually want some guidance and some governance on that. So
Yeah.
that being said, when we kind of work on an upper neck, and I also oftentimes pair it with the sacrum. Okay. And so when we think about those two zones, upper cervical and sacrum or pelvis area, those are what we call parasympathetic zones. Okay. So those are areas, and think about it, it makes sense, right? Parasympathetic, we're going to rest, digest, we're going to poop, all of those things. Upper cervical, right? That's a lot of processing going into the brain, hormone regulation, all of those things. And so now when we think about kind of working those areas, we're stimulating usually a kiddo who's in sympathetic fight or flight by working on what we call parasympathetic zones. And so as we're kind of working with them, we can actually see, and the vagal tone starts kind of improving and increasing. Oftentimes we see kids, their shoulders come down. If they're an infant, a lot of times we'll see their body tension, right? Where they're arching their back and crying and, all clenched like this. We'll oftentimes
Mhm.
see them open, right? So palms open, we'll see them kind of relax. A lot of times they sleep through an adjustment. For a kiddo who's a little bit further along, maybe 8, 9, 10, a lot of times what we'll hear or see is, one, their breath becomes a little deeper.
Mhm.
Two, they're sleeping a little bit more intently. And then three, their overall disposition, right? They're thinking through things a little bit more. Now, it doesn't preclude them from being kids, right? They're going to be kids, but and make kid decisions sometimes that are
For
not
sure.
quite what we want them to do. But at the same
Mm,
time, what we will notice is like, oh, there's more governance here, right? We can tell there's something changing with them.
mhm,
They're not, just yelling at their siblings for no reason, right? They're not getting
mhm,
overwhelmed and going into social settings, right? So, or actually, I had one example, and we'll move on. But like, I had one kiddo who she was a sensory processing kiddo, but she had anxiety with this, and mom and her went on a trip on a plane, and when mom got back, she was like, "That was the best plane ride ever." There was no like I didn't have to like physically drag her onto the plane. She walked
mm,
the plane. She was calm. She actually enjoyed it, and she's like, and trips past, that has not been a thing. It has been,
mhm.
anxiety, anxiety, anxiety to the point where physically having to like manhandle her onto the plane, right? Strap her,
Wow.
all of these things, right? So we're seeing kiddos who struggle with kind of a lot of times what we take for granted, but at the same time, these kids are really struggling because they're processing. Their vagal tone is way
Mhm,
out of sync and their nervous systems are way imbalanced. And so
mhm.
that's really what we're helping with.
Wow. I was going to ask you about a transformation story, but it sounds like that's one of your favorites.
It is one of my favorites. I mean, I've got a lot of them. I mean, really, when we think about, kiddos who, I have I'm not sure if you're familiar with PANS or PANDAS, but pediatric acute neuropsychiatric syndrome. It is like the conglomeration of all the things that kind of could go wrong with a kiddo in terms of, having anxiety, sensory processing issues, autism, right? Not peeing, not pooping, all of these things, not sleeping well, a lot of immune issues, right? When I have a mom that commutes from the Outer Banks with her kiddo, and she tells me, "Yeah, while we're here, we're actually going to our GI doc," and I'm a little nervous about it. And I've been treating this kiddo for quite some time now. And when she sends me a message, she's like, "That was the smoothest transition into a GI doc ever. Like he was perfect." And
Wow.
that is like, whoa, that's really cool because what we're doing is far more reaching than just, oh, they behave at school or, oh, it's easier for us at home. It makes parents' lives so much easier in every scenario, right? Whether it's going, shopping at IKEA or the grocery store
Mhm.
or or even taking them to other appointments that they need to go to, so
Yeah.
that's kind of cool when you see the work that you're doing day in and day out manifest. I'll give you
Yeah.
another one.
Yeah.
Actually, my best friend, um, they have two little girls. Their youngest daughter, she was very, and I always go back to colic and constipation, but she was very colicky, right? So very, very like sensory, in terms of like not wanting to sleep, not wanting to eat. I was over their house for dinner a couple nights ago, and legitimately, they've got the baby monitor in the kitchen, and so we're in there making dinner and hanging out. She's putting the baby to sleep, and just watching this baby that I've been working on for a few months just lights out. I'm like, that I was like, was that always a thing? And they're like, absolutely not, and
Mhm.
so that's really cool when
It
you
is.
see kiddos, change from maybe having anxiety getting on a plane to, kiddos who are just not sleeping well and making life
Yeah.
very, very difficult for themselves, but also, for their parents.
Yeah. And for the parents listening, um, I would say think of a vagal tone like an emotional bounce back. Like the better it is, the less likely your child's going to go into like Hulk mode after a math test or like
Yeah.
steal a
Yeah.
juice box or something, right?
Yeah, I mean, we call that, adaptability, right? So, like, the
Yeah.
more on our HRV, we've got, autonomic balance and then kind of this autonomic adaptability. And I kinda liken it to the HRV is a 30,000-foot view of their nervous system.
Mhm.
Essentially what we're looking at, and I really probably should have pulled up a graph and like showed this to you, but what we're looking at is within a range, right? And so there's this green box, and it's like we want the white dot to be in this green box, and in the green box is great. on the middle line in that green box is where we really want them. And I always say, like, adaptability is kind of like having a nervous system that is able to respond to stress, but then it's able to recover very easily.
Mm,
A nervous system that responds to stress but stays stuck, that is not adaptable. That is, just
gotcha.
that's the opposite, right? So
Yeah.
we want a system that, because nervous systems are always responding to things, whether it's sickness or an injury or a fall or stress at
Yeah.
home or whatever, it's always in ebb and flow, but we
Yeah.
want it to respond and then bounce back, right? That's what we're after.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, what do you say to the parent though that, I mean, obviously a lot of parents that walk into your practice are desperate, but they're really desperate for quick results.
Yeah.
Um, but hasn't really yet learned to trust the process. How do you
Yeah.
navigate that conversation?
Education. I mean, we have, a ton of parents who kind of are on the full spectrum, right? We've got moms and dads who, are those holistic parents. They're like, we know it's going to take time and we're all in, right? But we also have parents that are super, super skeptical. And it's like, are you sure this is going to work? Right. And, for those parents, it's even more important to explain and be patient with them and say, hey, look, I know you want a very quick fix for this.
Yeah.
I understand that. From a parent
Yeah.
perspective, you want to sleep. From a parent perspective, you don't want your kid to have anxiety. From a parent perspective, you want your kid to be, the all-star on the soccer team, right? But at the same time, we also need to understand that the reason why we went so far back in their kind of history, if you will, and their birth story and all the things is, I want you to understand this stuff has been going on for 2, 3,
Sure.
4, 5 years, however long it is,
Yeah.
right? And it's going to take a little bit of time. I'm not saying it's going to take 2, 3, 4, 5 years to get out of it. I'm just saying it's going to take some time for their
Yeah.
nervous system to bounce back. Okay.
Yep.
Now, kids, fortunately, are a lot more adaptable than we are. So they
Yeah.
typically respond. Now, if I have a 60-year-old, we've been at this for, a good 60 years, right? It's going to take a little bit more time. But most people, they kind of understand, okay, he's got me and he's got us and he's got, he understands what he's doing. But then along the lines, as we're coming in for their third visit of the week and they've been doing this for 4 weeks, there is a kind of a moment where it's like, okay, I need to reiterate and re-educate all the time, right? So I'm constantly giving them little pearls of wisdom, and my
Yeah.
staff is too. They've been trained on, hey, they are doing so well, but look at the milestones that they've achieved since receiving care here. You said they weren't
Mhm.
sleeping, and they're now sleeping 6 to 7 hours a night. You said that they weren't, able to really focus in school, but you just showed us a report last week that said, hey, little Susie Q is doing amazing in school. I've really noticed a turnaround. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Right. So we have to kind of reiterate because, oh, how quickly people forget where they started, right? Once they
Oh
start,
yeah.
well,
Oh, 100%. That applies to like every area of our life, Dr. Josh.
1000%, 1000%. We forget just how much pain we were in when
Yeah.
we're
Oh yeah.
feeling good, right?
Yes.
So,
1,000%. Whew.
um,
Okay. I'm over here wondering if I like need to book a follow-up appointment for my inner child.
yeah,
But all
come
right. So
handle
let
it. We'll walk through that. How about that?
I'll give you a visit. We'll talk about it.
Let's do it.
Let's zoom out though, because when honestly, when a kid heals, it affects everyone in the
Yeah.
house. So what I'd like to talk a little bit about here is the family, the mission, and really the future, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Why
Yeah.
is it so important, Dr. Josh, to support the whole family
Mhm.
and not just the anxious kid?
Yeah. I mean, it's important because really it's not just a kid who's got a nervous system, right? I mean, if you're a parent and your child is struggling with whatever,
Mm,
broken bones, struggles in school, emotional dysregulation, whatever it is, how you're affected as well, right? And as a parent. And so your nervous system is being taxed. Your nervous system is you're probably that's probably how you found us was late night searches, right? After your kid just threw, an emotional you know, cascade of things
Yes.
that happen before bed, right? So
Yes.
so it's so important for us to see the bigger picture is that yes, a lot of times parents will be like, just take care of my kiddo. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
We're gonna take care of him or her,
Yeah.
and we're gonna get them to a place of emotional regulation. We're gonna get them a place of neurological
Yeah.
regulation. But then after we do that and we get them on a wellness, guess what? You're next.
True.
And the
Yeah.
reason why is because there are 100% of the time parents are struggling. And it's usually, honestly, I'll tell you the order. I mean, it's usually the kid, then the dad, then the mom, right? Mom
Mhm.
is usually putting herself last.
Last.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I see it all the time. And I understand it. A lot of times families, few and far between, can't afford care for everyone at the
Right.
same time. But they will say, hey, after, Johnny gets squared away, I'd like my husband to be seen because he works a lot. And it's usually like back pain, but then we start talking about like neurological and
Sure.
on the intake, dads, they won't tell their wives, but they'll be like, oh, I struggle with a little bit of anxiety too. Or,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I don't sleep very
Yeah.
well, but I'm
Yeah.
never going to admit that to my wife. And
Of
then,
course.
we have a conversation with the wife and the
Sure.
husband, and it's like, hey,
Yeah.
you noted that and the wife's looking at him like, you deal with that? Yeah, I did.
I didn't realize this was a therapy session, but okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then when we start having those conversations, it's like, okay, well, he's dealing with this. What are you dealing with? I'll oftentimes look at it and say, what are you dealing with? They're like, oh, X, Y, and Z. But I really just want to triage my husband. I'm like, well, at some point we need to get you seen too, because
Mhm.
quite honestly, you guys are a family. And as a family, you guys integrate. And a lot of times, if there's stress in the household, it's not just one person, it's everyone who's stressed.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. And if I've seen it, I'm sure you've seen it 100 times, but it's not just one person really out of alignment. It's really the family dynamic, right?
One.
Itself that
Yeah.
needs an adjustment too.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. What do they say? The family that gets adjusted together stays together. Yeah.
oh, well, dude, that's so true. Like, yeah, I know it's funny, but it's like, there's some truth to that.
Oh, for sure.
All right. Yeah. So, okay. And I know we touched on this a little bit earlier because I kind of asked the question of how do you handle situations where, okay, some of it might be parenting, some of it
Mhm.
might actually be, the nervous system and whatnot. But so what's the difference, between kind of the rebellion and dysregulation
Yeah.
and how can really understanding that shift, um, and like, how can that help the way parents react essentially in a
For sure.
situation?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I get that question a lot. And what I tell people is an adjustment is not going to make a kid robotic. Like, let's just get that notion out of the way. It's
Wait,
not,
it's not.
yeah.
Oh,
I
man.
mean, I mean, we adjust a kid. It's like, hey, take out the trash.
Yeah,
Yeah, they're probably still gonna fight back on that a little bit. But
100%.
that being said, really what we're after is more function based
Mhm,
and
mhm.
less of a situation where it's like, oh, they just do everything I ask them or tell them at
Yeah,
a moment's notice. That's not, I mean, that's just not reality. That's not children,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
understanding kids are going to be kids. Kids are going to be inquisitive. Kids are going to ask questions. Kids at times in certain phases of life will be a little bit harder to be agreeable with in terms of, they're testing their boundaries. They're, seeing all these things. So what I tell parents is, look, at the end of the day, if we can get Johnny and Susie to be more regulated, right? And make more, um, have more kind of logic to their processing. And what I mean by that is how they're processing. It's not just jumping from point A to point B, or excuse me, point A to point Z. There's a B, C, D, E. There's some steps there. And what that looks like is a kiddo who, is less impulsive. What that looks like is a kid who's doing the basic functions really, really well. And I know I keep going back to this, but it's so true, right? When they're doing the basics really, really well, that's when a kiddo is regulated.
yeah, yeah,
And then we can evaluate parenting styles and
yeah,
disciplines and all of those things, right?
yeah,
I'm the first to admit, my kiddos, they're very, very regulated because they've been adjusted. They continuously get adjusted at a minimum twice a week. But at the
Mm,
same time, like my parenting style is, I hold them to standards, right? So
sure.
again, I don't sit in that camp because again, they're here for neurological regulation. But at the
Mhm.
same time, I'll have parents ask me, well, how do you parent? Your kids are so well behaved. I'm like, I hold them to a standard, just like every parent does, but
Yeah.
some
Or
standards are
should.
a little higher, some are a little lower. It just depends
Yeah.
on their
Yeah.
upbringing. But yeah,
Yeah.
I don't get
Yeah.
too involved in that world. But at the same time, like
Gotcha.
I had one I had one parent tell me, like, man, they're just not sitting still. Can you just adjust them real quick? And I'm like, if it worked that way, like I would be a bajillionaire, right? Because I'd have
Yeah, seriously. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I was like, but really what's happening here is they just become a little bit more regulated in terms of, hey, I'm able to sit still, right? It's not going to be right out of the bat. There's not one adjustment that just makes them sit, right? They're not
Yeah.
dogs, so
Yeah.
it's just funny the conversations that come through here. But I'm very methodical and I'm very intentional about the conversations that I have and how I have
That's
them
good.
and what are reasonable expectations.
I love that. I love that. All right. I want to talk about your why. We have talked about your why in the past.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I know your answer to this question, but um, for those of you meeting you for the first time on this podcast, why did you choose this path, Dr.
Yeah.
Josh? Like why are you so focused on this population, really?
Yeah. I love working with kids. And
Mm,
honestly, when I first got into chiropractic, it was like, I'm going to work with athletes. We live
yeah,
in, Hampton Roads and Virginia Beach, and a lot of Navy SEALs are housed here, right? We work with Navy SEALs and CrossFitters and all the things. And for a while I did, and to a degree I still do. Um, but at the same time, when my second child, Jude, was born, a lot of trauma, a lot of dysregulation, and you know for Jude, watching any parent watching your kids struggle, that's never fun, right? And we're
mm,
always
mm,
looking for alternatives and ways to fix it, so to speak.
mhm,
So when he was born, I mean, he was an emergency C-section, nuchal cord, meaning the umbilical cord is wrapped around his neck. And, you know, they're just like every time mom's contracting, that noose essentially is getting tightened and tighter. And this is how CP is brought on and things of that nature. So we elected for an emergency C-section, and that was traumatic as well. And so what we noticed was we had a irritable, colicky baby that struggled with the basics, right?
yeah,
Sleeping,
yeah,
pooping, eating, right? And then that actually transferred into, okay, now we've got a very aggressive, year and a half, 2-year old, who is hitting kids at school and biting and all of these things. And
mm,
he actually got kicked out of Montessori school, at
wow,
2. And so we're sitting here looking at ourselves like, okay, what do we do? Right? We're at the pediatrician. Well, you could try counseling. And I'm like, how do you counsel a 2-year old? And two, we can medicate them. I'm like, we're not doing that either. Okay. So I'll agree to the counseling. I'm not going to necessarily do, or play therapy. I'm not necessarily going to do the medication. And so
yeah,
that kind of started us down the rabbit hole of looking for alternatives. And, I was a chiropractor at the time. I was not I was not aware of this world of pediatric and neurologically focused chiropractic. And so when I found it, the
mm,
pediatric experience, I dove headfirst, and I started applying what I was learning to Jude, and to, basically what he was experiencing. And then I, bought CLA scanners and Insight scanners, and I started scanning them, and not even really knowing what I was doing, but like, just kind of getting walked through,
yeah. And wanting to help their child, yeah,
yeah, and just trying to figure it
trying what you
out.
can, yeah,
And so as we started doing that, I started noticing monumental change. I mean,
yeah,
when I tell you, I mean, I really should have, in preparation for this, I should have put up his initial scans and his current scans, because his initial scans, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to look at those and just be like, holy smokes, that was bad,
mm,
right?
mm,
When we look at his EMG, I mean, he is just blown out.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and then looking at it now, it's like, oh gosh, that's so much better.
yeah,
So, that to me, as starting seeing Jude start changing and turning the tide in his behavior and his overall just general disposition, I was like, if
yeah,
this is working for him, there's so many other kids out there, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
I was like, you know what? I need to open a practice. That's my life's calling. That's God's calling on my life, is to help kids who are
Yeah.
dysregulated become regulated, and adults too. I don't want to exclude the adults, but
Of
at the same
course.
time,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, but at the same time, like that is my calling. And so I opened an entire practice and I named it True Source because I really want people to understand we're getting to the root cause of the issue, not just
Mm,
giving a medication, not just giving a pill, not just giving a supplement, right? We're getting to the root cause of their issues. So we're getting
I
to the
love that.
true source of their problem.
Yeah. I love your story. And it doesn't resonate with me because of what you walked through. It resonates with me because you used your trial with your child, your pain, and literally just changed it and applied it to a purpose,
Yeah.
for other families. And I live that, and you and I, we've talked about that offline as well. Like that's literally our pain. If it's not used for a purpose, then why are we even walking through it? So,
Right. Right.
thank you for being obedient to the call, because some people will get, that knock,
Mhm.
but won't answer. So
Yeah.
I appreciate you being obedient and
Ab-
following through. So
Absolutely. Yeah. It's
thank you for what you do, Dr. Josh. Really,
absolutely.
really.
Yeah. It's truly the joy of my life. People really need to know like just how bad Jude was.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
not that he's a bad kid. He's an amazing human. He's an amazing kid.
Yeah.
Obviously I'm biased because he's mine, but at the same
Ah,
time, like looking at him from a neurological perspective, oh, he was a mess. He was an absolute mess. And so
yeah.
I
Yeah.
actually bring it up sometimes when I'm going through kids' scans. Like,
Mm,
just for point of reference, I want you to see where my kid was and
mhm.
where he is now. And so a lot of times when I do that, parents are like, oh, wow, like you do have a
Yeah.
personal story with us. And I'm like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And it's
Yeah.
part,
I
yeah,
think, I think what, I mean, and speaking from kind of an outsider and a parent, if I walked in with my child and my doctor was showing me scans of his own child or her own child, I think that would make a better connection for me too. It would create this trust factor because, hey, he's doing it for his kid,
absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
So yeah. All right, let's shift gears just for this question here. But as
Sure.
far as the profession and where it's heading, do you think we're finally reaching kind of a tipping point where nervous system care and mental health kind of start to overlap? And the reason I asked that, by the way, is you mentioned when your child was 2, you were at the, pediatrician, and they mentioned counseling, or they mentioned play therapy. My wife's a counselor, um, and she loves play therapy,
Sure.
and there is a place for that, right? But do you think that there's we're at a point where there's an overlap there between kind of the mental health and the nervous system care?
1000%. I mean, I think that as counselors and psychotherapy has been a lot more widely received
Mhm.
for longer than chiropractic has.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and I understand why, because honestly, as a chiropractor, we can't even agree amongst ourselves half the time. So, so it's like if we kind of get our message clear, and can
yeah.
present it to the general public, then we'll help ourselves in that regard. But my point being is that I think that people are starting to now see connections, and it's interesting. They're seeing connections between mental health and how the brain processes,
Mm,
and what the role of subluxation plays in that. Okay, if you've got a disconnect, right? If you've got a subluxation, meaning a misalignment or stress on the nervous system, and that brain is not able to interpret information in the perceived or right way, that is going to ultimately disrupt communication between the brain and the body. I mean, there's no arguing this. Okay, like people widely accepted, pediatricians, neurologists, all the people that I've talked to in my community all agree that the nervous system is foundationally the root of all dysfunction and dis-ease, right? So a lot of times when we're now looking at people with mental health disorders, whether it be depression or anxiety or PTSD or what have you, you can have a similar conversation or an argument to say, you know what, we still need to do psychotherapy. We still need to do counseling. And honestly, there are some instances where medication is needed. Okay.
Mm.
But at
Mm-hmm.
the same time, we
Right. You should
also
say.
are now
Yeah.
starting to address, hey, what is the role of subluxation or
Yeah.
disconnection between the body and the brain? If there's a disconnect, and most of the time there is, how do we now help that? And it's
Sure.
interesting because my brother, he's at Ohio State and he studies cognitive science and neurodegenerative diseases. He's getting his PhD, and
Mm.
he's brilliant. I mean, he studies brains for a living, and his particular area of focus is kind of the degenerative side, but he's also kind of made allusions or references to maybe studying kind of the more regenerative side, right? Where it's like, okay, what does an adjustment do to brainwave activity? So I think down the pike, as we kind of start, him and I, hopefully he moves back to Virginia, we can do some studies where, maybe we perform an adjustment and look at brainwave activity and how does that actually change? Because we've
Between
studied it in
those.
degenerative
Yeah.
processes, but I would really love to see, if we could get, a couple case studies and see, hey, this particular case, this person was, had anxiety and this person had depression. Let's look at a pre brainwave study and then a post adjustment brainwave study. And,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
areas of that brain are lighting up now.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I foresee this going, or at least my career path going,
Sure.
um, into more kind of foundational research for our profession. And
Yeah.
that will substantiate a lot of what we're doing. In addition to the scans that we already do, in addition to, all of the testimonials that we have, now actually having actualized data and brainwave studies to look at
Yeah.
this. Holy smokes.
Yeah. So good. So good. And yeah, and I'm actually looking forward to that. I really hope you do kind of go on that endeavor, because we need to get more research articles into the medical journals, right,
Agree.
about
Agree.
chiropractic care, not necessarily the chiropractic journals.
Sure.
For example, Dr. Justin, who you've met actually,
Mhm.
um, he recently submitted an article to, I forget the name of the journal, but it is a medical journal. So
Sure.
obviously jumping through hoops and trying to get it, all that, but it's
Yeah.
there. But we need more of that. So I
Sure.
love that your goal is to do
Well,
this.
yeah. I mean, the
All
medical
power to you.
community is becoming, believe it or not, they're more and more accepting of what we do, which is awesome.
Slowly, but yeah, I am seeing that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
The tide is
Um,
shifting a little bit.
mhm. Yeah, it definitely is. Okay, so in one bold statement, Dr. Josh, what does the future of healthcare need to become?
Future of healthcare needs to become less about symptoms and more about root causes.
Dude, right there. See, that's why we need voices like yours in this space, man. That's
Oh
awesome.
man. Yeah.
Simple, powerful. Love it, man. Yes, root causes. Yeah, thank you for that. That's
Of
awesome.
course. Of course.
What would you say? All right, and honestly, I could talk to you all day, but I know
Same.
you have a
Same.
life to get
Same.
back to. But I'm gonna close this out here with a couple of questions here. But what would you say to the parent listening right now who feels helpless, maybe hopeless, like they've tried everything? What would your advice be to that, Dr. Chuck?
I would say that I understand where you're at, and I understand, that feeling of hopelessness, and I understand, being stressed out and, staying up late and looking for answers and feeling like you've knocked down every door that there is to knock on, and also being told it's fine, don't worry, they'll grow out of it, right? That's like literally the one thing that is unanimous amongst every patient that comes in here. Is like, I've been told they're just going to grow out of it, right? And
Yeah,
to that parent, I would say, you know what? The fact of the matter is, and research and longitudinal studies and experience and looking at kids for as long as I have, and as well as some of my cohorts, they don't grow out of it. They don't just magically get better, right? They typically grow into deeper, more entrenched issues of neurologic
mm,
dysregulation. And there is hope. There is answers. There's a ton of resources out there. But for you specifically, I would say look first to the nervous system. I mean, Hippocrates once said, look first to the spine for the root of all disease, right? And
Mhm.
so that being said, I would say, really dive into, the idea that your child may need a neurologically based pediatric chiropractor,
Mhm.
someone who's
Mhm.
going to look far beyond just the expression of the issue. They're going to look at the root cause. They're going to look far beyond just symptoms. And it's not a pill. It's not just, you know, kind of we do this and then they're done, right? We need to really understand, the why. And then we need to know the what. And then we need to kind of justify the how, right? And so
Mhm.
that being said, I would say, find a pediatric chiropractor. And actually, I mean, if you actually want to, there's an amazing resource that we have. It's called PXDocs, PXDocs.com. And that is basically a directory. Anyone in the world can put in their zip code or area code and find, hopefully, a pediatric or pediatric experienced chiropractor around them that does these
Yep.
scans. So we can plug that link in
That out
there. And
there.
there's
Yeah.
also resources on that page as well. And again, my mentor, Dr. Tony Ebel, Dr. Matt Hill, with the pediatric experience, they are the ones who trained me, and they're the ones who are training thousands of others to do the work that we're doing for these kids. And so again, my goal is to get them on this show. So yeah,
Yeah.
that would
Can't
that would
wait for that.
that would truly be amazing.
Sweet.
But
Sweet.
there are answers. There is hope out there. And it might just be in a different corner than what you've been looking at.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you, Dr. Josh.
Yeah.
For folks that want to find you, connect or get plugged into, what you're doing at True Source, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah. So, obviously, they can email me, Dr. Josh at truesourcechiropractic.net. They can find me on social media, True Source Chiropractic, at True Source Chiropractic on Instagram. If you just type in True Source Chiropractic on Facebook, our page pops up.
Mhm.
And then obviously just, traditional Google search. You can find me
Yeah.
on that. You can find me on that directory as well. If you go on that directory at pxdocs.com, type in
Mhm.
Virginia Beach. I think like the first one listed. So yeah, I mean, there's a myriad of ways to find me.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Josh, for coming on the show and being
absolutely.
with us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. I mean, and again, any chance that I can have to express what it is we do and teach and educate people, I
Yeah.
want to honor that opportunity. So thank you.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, man. Absolutely. And another thank you, a third, fourth, fifth thank you to Dr. Josh. Really, thank you for the clarity,
Absolutely.
really the conviction, and for helping us reframe anxiety
Yeah.
from, a problem to solve to a message to listen to. And to every parent out there, if this episode stirred something in you, don't ignore it. Share this with a friend, maybe rewatch it. Start asking different questions, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes the most powerful adjustments start with awareness, really. Well, this has been Beyond Adjustments. Until next time, stay aligned, stay curious, and give that vagus nerve a little love. Catch you in the next.